Um, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this SASIG meeting, but especially to welcome Faye. I've seen this paper, or I've seen a previous version, probably changed about 30 or 40 times,
Yes.
because Faye has never finished in the past. But it's an area of spirituality, music and art and visions, which was quite well known at its time, lives on a bit in the so-called New Age, but really demands, as Faye has done, a great deal more attention to it, and so on. And Faye's scholarship is remarkable, and as she's spent a great deal of time researching this paper. It's exciting, it's challenging. In some cases, it's quite scary. So I'm not going to
Yes.
not going to take over too much of your time, Faye. I'm going to hand over to you to introduce this incredible period of culture, really, and the coming together of art, and two of the arts together, really, interfacing with one another. Over to you, Faye.
Well, thank you so much, June, for that very generous introduction. And I shall start my paper entitled Composing Symmorphies, which will become clear in a moment, Annie Besant's Theosophies, František Kupka's Chromatic Music, and their Astral Visions. It's not now moving. I don't know what is happening, but it's all right. Okay, I'll just have to use the arrows on the screen. The concepts of chromatism in music and musicality in color were vital for composing what the avant-garde, Czech-born, Paris-based artist František Kupka called his Symmorphies. These were astral symphonies of color and sound in painting, able to vibrate with what he called major and minor chromatic modalities, and in tone in major and minor musical keys. Their correspondences were vital for capturing the interrelationship between visible and invisible realities that Kupka considered were captured by the mystical philosophies of Emanuel Swedenborg and conveyed by the theosophical philosophy of Annie Besant. While Kupka's exploration of music and mysticism germinated at the Viennese Academy of Fine Art, it was not until Paris that he conceived of musical scales as synchronous with the pitch and vibration of primary and secondary colors. Not until Paris did he define his paintings as, and I quote, concepts, syntheses, chords, rather than just paintings. Already familiar with Madame Blavatsky's secret doctrine, it was in Paris that Kupka immersed himself in the study of Annie Besant's theosophy, particularly man and his bodies, alongside life after death, reincarnation, karma, thought power, first published in English in 1898, and thought forms. Kupka also avidly consumed Besant's research done with C.W. Leadbeater on the astral plane, astral bodies, and astral vision. Contuminously inspired by the new music of Claude Debussy and Maurice Ravel, amidst the Bach revival, alongside discoveries in astrophysics at the Observatoire de Paris, Kupka then fused these dimensions into his composition of Symmorphies, as I shall endeavour to illuminate. By the time that Kupka settled permanently in Paris between 1895 and 1900, the city was pulsating with what Alain Corbin calls soundscape, especially the atonal music of Ravel and Debussy, fusing art, theatre, poetry, dance, and images. I love images almost as much as music, Debussy declared. Under Gabriel Fauré's direction at the Conservatoire de Paris from 1905, the music of Debussy and Ravel was regularly performed. Immediately, Kupka felt absorbed into Debussy's and Ravel's Paris, not only as an asceticist, but also as an anarcho-communist, regularly contributing polemical cartoons to L'Assiette Aubert and financially surviving on them. A medium and magnetist since the age of 14, aware of the magnetism of Henri de Ville, Kupka survived by practicing them while painting and studying theosophy. Sorry, hang on. Instead of the theosophy of Lady Caithness or Saint Patrice, or even the occult science of Gérard Ancous, although he did investigate it, Gérard Ancous, otherwise known as Papus, Kupka concentrated upon the theosophy, not of Papus, as I mentioned, but of Annie Besant. Once Kupka began working in Paris, it was Annie Besant who played the dominant role in theosophical discourses and visual cultures, particularly after Madame Blavatsky's demise. Despite not being elected president of the Theosophy Society until 1907, in 1891, immediately Annie Besant acknowledged in English and French why I became a theosophist. She then became its most vocal orator and prolific publisher. An ardent supporter of le droit humain, in 1902, Besant founded with Maria de Rham the Masonic Order of Universal Co-Freemasonry in Paris. So popular did Besant become with French feminists, theosophists, occultists, magnetists, mysticists, spiritualists, scientists, and artists that frequently she was invited to speak in Paris by the Société Théosophique de France, particularly given her highly proficient French. Not only were her lectures published in full in the main French theosophical journals launched in 1890, Le Lotus Bleu, otherwise known as La Revue Théosophique, but they were also referenced by the French press in Le Roi, Le Gouloir, La Patrie, Le Siècle, and discussed at length by the feminist newspaper La Fonte, which you see on your right. Interviews with Annie Besant were published in this feminist newspaper. Based in Benares, now known as Varanasi, from 1895, it was there that Pierre Loti interviewed Annie Besant in 1900. Quoting her long allegiance to socialism, her repudiation of dogmas, racism, genderism, sexism, and materialism, plus her daily practice of yoga and meditation, Loti also stressed her welcome of atheists, Buddhists, Brahmins, Hindus, Jews, Protestants, and Catholics. Having studied science extensively at Birkbeck College in London University, once women students were finally admitted, Besant argued in her December 1897 lecture at the Grande Salle des Sociétés Savantes that not only was theosophy able to conciliate many dimensions of science with religion, but also to expand Darwin's theories in relation to sensory evolution and the attainment of reincarnation. Following publication in French and English in 1899 of Evolution of Life and Form, Besant's post-Darwinian theories were expounded. With all of her books continually translated into French, published in Paris, and circulated by Publications Théosophiques, Besant's theosophy became well known to Kupka, as did her collaborations with C.W. Leadbeater on art, music, and occult chemistry. In his personal notes, Kupka reveals extensive knowledge of Besant's writings and lectures, particularly her exploration of the impact of music and thought upon the body, and her elucidation of the ascent from the mental and ethereal planes to the astral sphere. So overwhelming could be the experience of hearing music that Besant and Leadbeater had illustrated it in vibrantly coloured images for their book, Thought Forms, published in both English and French in 1905, with 58 colour illustrations. So colourful, powerful, and immense was the organ music of Mendelssohn, Gounod, and Wagner that they illustrated how it totally overwhelmed the church in which it was performed, emitting, I quote, vibrations in every direction, unquote. Simultaneously, the occultist writer Jules Bois was exploring how the absorption of chromatic music during magnetism could unleash the unconscious and lead to l'art inconscient, unconscious art. Yet in Besant's Man and His Bodies, in French translation and circulation from 1902, as well as in Leadbeater's Clairvoyance and The Astral Plane, the concept of the astral body as a musical instrument tuned to the harmonies of the multiverse was explored, particularly its facility to travel to astral spheres. Through daily yoga and intensive meditation, both practiced rigorously by Kupka, Besant emphasized, man can become far more than his bodies. And I'm going to use the S-H-E. She has in her much that she is unable to express on the physical or even on the astral plane. As Besant added, the astral world is a definite region of the universe, surrounding and interpenetrating the physical, but imperceptible to our ordinary observation, because it is composed of a different order of matter. That Kupka's visions and mediumistic experiences resonated with these theories of the astral world is illuminated by Kupka's two self-portraits. Significantly entitled La Gamme Jaune 1 and La Gamme Jaune 2, Kupka's yellow scale signifies, I'll just show you the other, their double meaning as musically and pictorially chromatic. Long had Kupka experimented with this fusion of music and colour, although, as he confessed to his close friend, the Czech poet Josef Makar, he had never shown this artwork to anyone. I paint, he said, but only concepts, syntheses, chords. But this I do only for myself. Yet Kupka's choice of two self-portraits here signifies exposure of his double identity, while marking a shift in his praxis to working in series like composers. Earlier in a self-portrait, Kupka had pictured himself in local colours, seated in an upright chair at his drafting desk, pen poised in his right hand. This appears to be one of the fine-nibbed pens he used for his satirical, anarchist cartoons, exemplified by science triumphing over money. It was also the pen used for his scientific illustrations for Alice Reclus' 5-volume L'Homme et la Terre, Man and the Earth. Yet in both paintings of the yellow scale, Kupka pictured himself removed from art making, physically slumped in a laid-back cane chair in the earliest portrait, cigarette half smoked in his left hand, clutching a book in his right hand, into which his index finger is inserted to keep his place. A sense of intense concentration is conveyed. In the later portrait, Kupka's earnestness seems to be replaced by contemplation and self-reflection. To portray its spatial, musical, and spiritual ambience, Kupka explained, atmosphere in a painting is achieved through bathing the canvas in a single scale of colours. He then added, thus one can achieve an état d'âme, a soul state exteriorized in luminous form. Following Michel-Eugène Chevreul's gamme chromatique for orange yellows and Paul Gauguin's self-portrait, significantly entitled Les Misérables, dedicated to Vincent van Gogh, Kupka confined his palette to orange and yellow hues. Yet unlike Gauguin's portrait, Kupka's musical title links his application to the whole tone scale and harmonies being exposed by Debussy in his images, particularly in Debussy's Reflections in Water. Unlike Gauguin's yellows, Kupka's yellow scale may be correlated not only to chromatic music, but also to the musical scales to which these colours theosophically correspond. Sound is always associated with colour, explained Besant. When a musical note, When a musical note is sounded, a flash of colour corresponding to it may be seen by those whose finer senses are already to some extent developed, unquote. Hence, the specific connotations of Kupka's self-portraits seem to arise from his knowledge of Besant's Man and His Bodies, Leadbeater's Astral Plane, and their co-authored thought forms, which Kupka owned from its first French translation. Following thought forms and its 6 illustrations of yellow thought forms, signifying vague intellectual pleasure. Let me just go to that. That's vague intellectual pleasure. Helpful thoughts, an aspiration to enfold all, and an intellectual conception of cosmic order, and the logos pervading all. These significations were defined by Besant and Leadbeater and correlated to Kupka's portraits, particularly his self-portraits. Yellow, according to Besant, always indicates intellectual capacity, she explained. In the astral body of the average man, it shows as yellow ochre, while pure intellect devoted to the study of philosophy or mathematics appears as golden, rising to a luminous lemon or primrose yellow when a powerful intellect is employed absolutely unselfishly for the benefits of humanity. This luminous lemon may be correlated to Kupka's jacket and head cushion that frame his body in his first self-portrait, as well as to his occupation of reading. The bold curve of orange, correlated by Besant and Leadbeater to perfect self-confidence, may be identified with the collar of Kupka's jacket, curling around his neck. The, quote, rich deep orange colour of the background may form what Besant called a golden plane, acting like an aura to signify, and I quote, the loftiest aspirations, thoroughly supported by an intellectual grasp of the situation, unquote. Picturing himself turned towards his beholder, Kupka then appears to be opening his body to them. That he wishes to engage his beholder is signified by his intense stare at them in a mesmerizing gaze that portrays his power of hypnosis, for which he had long achieved renown. His black pupils clearly pinpointed within his deep brown irises of the eyes. Yet, in the yellow scale too, Kupka pictures himself turned away from the beholder. Additionally, its colour scale appears closer to primrose yellow, signifying, following Besant, and I quote, an intellectual conception of cosmic order and the highest and most unselfish use of intellectual power, unquote. With both arms seeming to enfold his body, Kupka portrays himself as corporeally self-contained in an environment in which he was able, following Besant's recommendation, I quote, to shut out the outer world. The more quiet your surroundings, she said, the easier will it be to let the astral side play unchecked while the physical eyes are open. Unquote. Gone are Kupka's clearly defined pupils and irises. In their place appear empty eye sockets, transformed into azure-coloured pools outlined in black. In Besant's theosophy, this signifies travel to the astral plane. Theorised by Pappus in his 1880 treatise on occult science and elaborated in his Astral Body article of 1890, astral travel was also illustrated by Pappus in The Mysteries of Isis. Yet while Pappus likened astral travel to a horse being able to gallop away from its sleeping coachman, Besant explained it physiologically and psychologically. He may be said to be almost asleep, but she points out he is wide awake, working far more actively and accurately with greater power of comprehension than when physically confined. And he can move about freely and with incredible speed across any distance without causing the least disturbance to the sleeping body on his bed. In this trance-like soul state, Kupka then appears exteriorized in luminous forms, as if he's been able to plummet so deeply into transcendental meditation that he's been able to leave his mental and etheric bodies. He seems to have attained his astral body with astral vision while traveling in the astral sphere. This astral sphere could then appear a world more real, explained Besant, than his physical world. Often Kupka had recorded experiencing this state, which he illustrated in his book, Illustrating Elise Reclus, L'Homme et la Terre. Yesterday, he explained, I experienced a split consciousness where it seemed I was observing the earth from outside. I was in a great empty space and saw the planets rolling quietly by. After that, it was difficult to come back to the trivia of everyday life. Nevertheless, Kupka had not attempted to convey these experiences in his painting until exposed to Besant's theosophy, which he referenced in his personal notes. In Kupka's second portrait, Kupka then seemed to depict his astral body with astral vision in what some French theosophers called willed astral projection of an état d'âme, of a soul state. Yet according to Annie Besant, I quote, to understand the universe and superuniversal potential, Besant stressed not only, and I quote, the need to develop the astral body and its power to function on the astral plane, but also to record our activities there and remember it, unquote. In order to understand and remember this experience, Besant then explained what needed to be done. I quote, we need to leave in deep sleep our material prison in order to devote ourselves to the astral world, to record our useful activities there, securing for our brothers and sisters what we were able to achieve there, unquote. In so doing, Besant then predicted that, and I quote again, a day shall come when his or her uninterrupted consciousness will be forthcoming and shared, and then your life shall no longer be composed of work days, remembered separated by nights forgotten. It shall form a continuous whole where the physical body is put aside periodically to take the rest it needs while man himself deploys his or her astral body in order to explore the astral world, unquote. Inspiring Kupka to explore his dreams and his visions on transcending, sorry, I should have put that quote up earlier. Let me just go on from that. Inspiring Kupka to explore his dreams and his visions on transcending the earth and surveying the cosmos, from this time onward, astral vision became seminal to Kupka's art practice. and particularly his conception of the artist as an astral traveller and telepathic visionary, able not only to penetrate the cosmos, but also to capture its astral dimensions. Hence, while music had enabled Kupka to reconceive his paintings as, and I quote, concepts, syntheses, chords, astral vision and astral travels enabled him to capture cosmology in his new paintings that he called, unquote, Symmorphies. That this facility proved exceptional is illustrated by Annie Besant's observation that there are few people who have come to the point where they can look quietly on the astral world and record what they see there. Continuously, Annie Besant urged Theosophus to study. It was during work on his painting Cosmic Spring that Kupka began to study geology, physiology, and the physics of electromagnetism at the Sorbonne, and inspired by Annie Besant. Inspired by Besant's emphasis upon the importance of scholarly research to gain what she called an intellectual perception of the cosmic order, Kupka endeavored to develop cosmic perspectives to explore what Besant called the logos of our solar system. Simultaneously, Kupka endeavored to absorb the new discoveries in astrophysics and astrophotography at the Observatoire de Paris, together with the new publications on astronomy by Camille Flammarion, and particularly his popular book on astronomy. Spurred on by these discoveries and Annie Besant, Kupka's mission as an artist became a cosmic one. His cosmic dimension became also integral to his political position as a Kropotkian anarcho-socialist, as illuminated by Kupka's illustrations commissioned for Alice Reclus' L'Homme et la Terre. Started with stars and planets sweeping across the night sky, a celestial arc is one of Kupka's first images, in front of which a figure like, sorry. Right, let me just go back to that for a moment. So one of Kupka's first images for this book is a figure like Reclus scrutinizing the planet. Go to this one. And so you get two figures. One's scrutinizing the planet by looking at it, and one looking at it physically, and the other looking at it cosmically. So, in Reclus' final chapter, entitled Progress, this celestial arc that which started the book re-emerges as a cosmic one. The last image in the last volume of Reclus' 6-volume series of L'Homme et la Terre, it signifies a new dawn in which Kupka depicts men, women, and children gazing towards the galaxies as if heralding a cosmic generation aspiring to attain astral vision, if not, in fact, astral bodies able to pursue astral travel. Infusing his studies of cosmology with the vibratory power of magnetic emanations, Kupka's celestial and cosmic arc then became a dominant motif. Once again, music acted as a source of exploration for Kupka. Especially the fugues of Bach. I'm still groping in the dark, he confessed, but I believe I can find something between sight and hearing, and I can produce a fugue in colours, as Bach has done in music. Amidst Kupka's growing awareness of astrophysics and his exposure to astrophotography, the possibility of the endless variations of Bach's fugues began to be correlated by him, following Swedenborg, to the infinite rotation and revolution of the planets in the solar system and the spiraling formation of galaxies. As Kupka explained, contemplating the night sky filled with stars, one often thinks of the universe as just a mass of points. The suns and the satellites, ovoid spheres, rings, nebulae, and comets that populate infinite space. As astronomy describes it, all of this to our eyes simply represents a mass of bright points. Yet on the other hand, other infinite small points observed with a microscope signify, as science tells us, we are part of an infinite multitude of molecules and atoms. Even smaller points become, to the naked eye, bodies with articulated organisms, unquote. With the development of planetary observatories containing solar physics instruments, spectrographs, photometers for astrophotography, the period from roughly 1860 to 1910 was one of profound transformation for the sciences of the observatory. And this was particularly pointed out by Camille Flammarion. As Charlotte Biggs observes, this period was one that also included the emergence of astrophysics and the establishment of a great number of popular observatories and uranias. 2 years after Camille Flammarion's book, which you see here, Astronomie Populaire, was published, in 1880, his magazine, L'Astronomie, was launched with illustrations, while his own observatory at Juvisy-sur-Orge was initiated. 4 years later, when Paul Henry and his brother Prosper began to use the Grand Telescope and 33 centimeter refractor at the Observatoire de Paris to photograph Jupiter and Saturn, they produced the first successful images. At the Paris Astrographic Congress in 1888, the Carte du Ciel project had been launched from the Observatoire de Paris, with 20 observatories agreeing to cooperate on mapping the whole sky using special photographic telescopes. That year, when the Société Astronomique de France was founded by Flammarion, he declared, "We are all citizens of the sky." In 1900, the largest refracting telescope worldwide was erected in Paris at the Palais de l'Optique as the centerpiece of the Exposition Universelle, alongside Flammarion's pavilion, L'Astronomie, in which there were 3 astral panoramas. On display at the Observatoire de Paris were 80 heliographies of the Atlas photographique de la Lune. Using the 60-centimeter chord refractor, this project had been fully realized in 1910 with approximately 10,000 photographs and a large-scale model of the moon. Many of these were displayed at the Observatoire and the Musée des Arts and Métiers. It just jumps out of this sometime. Right. Just go. The transit of Mercury and the Morehouse Comet in 1908 at the Flammarion Observatory were also captured. So not only was Kupka exposed to this rapid development in astronomy, and here we are, this is the Morehouse Comet, but Kupka also became absorbed in it, researching the color, movement and sound of planets, comets, stars, nebula and galaxies. He also explored their relationship to music, as we see by this painting. At the 1912 Salon d'Automne, in the notorious Salle des Cubistes, and in the place of honor, Kupka proudly reported that 2 of his paintings were hung arising from this quest. A morpho fugue in 2 colors and a morpho chromatic shot. Rather than render a 3-dimensional illusion of 2 spheres in a morpho fugue in 2 colors, following astrophotography, particularly the Atlas photographique de la Lune, Kupka created 2 large, seemingly flat, impastoed and opaque white discs against a black ground. Absorbing 3/4 of the picture plane, this was a format more often used in astrodiagrams and astrophotography of the moon and other planets. The cosmic curve created by the white disc of Kupka's against the black background, reiterated by the long black arc outlining the disc in front, suggest a long sweeping movement, signifying their rotation from left to right. Seemingly flat, these discs may invoke a theory of the solar system emanating from a spinning solar nebula, which collapsed into a protoplanetary disk. Out of this, planets theoretically emerged with the sun at its center. A theory first proposed by Swedenborg, this theory had been developed by Immanuel Kant and Pierre-Simon Laplace. The amorphous reds and blues spiraling in front of these discs of Kupka's may then refer to photographic surveys of spiraling galaxies of nebulae. The Andromeda Nebula having been photographed at the Yerkes Observatory in 1900, while the Spiral Nebula had been photographed in France in 1901. They had been followed by of galaxy photography, including the Triangulum Galaxy, the Barnard Galaxy, a needle galaxy, otherwise known as Berenice's hair, with the Milky Way reconceived as a great spiral nebula envisaged from within. While the spiraling astro motions of the red and blue curvular forms in Kupka's painting appear similar to nebulae, their oscillations seem comparable to those that appeared in the journal L'Astronomie to track the orbit of planets and Halley's Comet in May 1910. Since electromagnetism was identified with planetary revolutions, rotations, and spiraling formations, as Kupka was aware from his study of it, his choice of red and blue in this painting may be correlated to his awareness of the positive and negative poles in magnetic energy fields. He would have also been aware that when two linear electromagnetic waves in red and blue are orientated to each other along a 90-degree axis, a spiral could be generated, unifying their alternating vectors over time. These colours may also be correlated to their theosophical significations, Besant having used the Sanskrit word Kama Rupa, wish of form, to signify that red contains, and I quote from her, all the potentials of matter and is the starting point on the earth, corresponding to Do on the musical scale. Blue is, Besant explained, the true colour of the sun, and it appears yellow only owing to the effect of the absorption of vapours, chiefly metallic, by its atmosphere. These colours were then rendered by Kupka in a range of hues, intensities, and transparencies. I'll just go back to that for a minute. As if to signify their composition in varying degrees of ephemeral gaseous substances that seem to flicker like flames and vibrate like magnetic waves. Hence, no matter how densely applied Kupka's paint is in parts, as illuminated by my photographs of these details, the white discs remain translucent, never becoming occluded by these magnetic waves. In spiraling around one another, the amorphous reds and blues then appear to crisscross, overlap, and interlace in a contrapuntal forward motion. They therefore seem to form what Debussy called the curve of Bach and what Besant called the cosmic curves created by planetary rotation. In so doing, they appear to act as a cosmic counterpart to the white discs and convey the endless contrapuntal possibilities of, following Kupka's title, a fugue in two colours or in two voices. By deploying forms of different dimensions, composed according to rhythmic concerns, wrote Kupka, I will achieve a formal and directional structure typical of a fugue in which the development of a theme across time or space is undertaken with unlimited harmonies. That Kupka's series of paintings of these fugues alludes to a fugue in two parts is, according to Peter Virgo, and I quote from Peter, beyond all reasonable doubt. Just as in fugues where progression is made through the repetition of the theme in the same key, Peter Virgo explains, commonly beginning on a note either a third or fifth away from the starting one, so does this occur in Kupka's painting. Transposing this to his art, the colours red and blue on a colour wheel are either 3 or 5 colours apart. Musicologically, Kupka's reds and blues spiralling around one another could then signify the spatial separation of two voices and the musical interval between two melodies that become intertwined. As the lines crisscross and overlap, observes Peter Virgo, they modify one another like the ways in which the juxtaposition of melodic lines within a fugue create consonances and dissonances that determine the harmonic structure of the fugue. Following Kepler's and Pythagoras' theory of planets as vibrating and continually producing a sound, with their relative distances from one another corresponding to musical intervals, the results then seem to be astral visions of music of the spheres. Sorry. Showing you some of these astral visions. Ultimately, from his long study of astronomy and physics, Kupka was aware of the curvature of light, and from his examination of Kepler's astronomy Copernica, that the orbit of Mars and the planets was elliptical, not circular, as illuminated by Kepler's diagram. Let's see if I can get that. Here we are. These ellipses appear to have been glimpsed by Kupka during his astral travels and painted in their oscillating complexities by him in his studio after World War I, when he was able to get back to his painting. So he produced a new series exploring ellipses over 1921 to 22, as signified by this work, Traits, Plans, Space 3, and his later painting with the same title, in which the ellipses swirl around one another in vibrant reds, blues, greens, and yellows. From his study of Newton, Kupka was aware that comets also follow the path of a parabola. Following Einstein's new theories, he was also aware that space and time form one entity, space-time, and that massive objects in the universe that have mass, like planets and stars, curve the space around them. That objects and light rays are moving through the universe and moving through curved space-time was also captured by Kupka's 1920 painting, Animated Lines, and his versions painted 2 and 3 years later. These astral visions of the planets were captured by Kupka in these cosmological abstractions to form his new genre of cosmological modernism, ignited by Annie Besant's theosophy, astrophysics, astrophotography, and the new music. While the origin of this quest could be traced to Kupka's initial training as a mesmerist and spiritualist. His specific search seems to have been ignited in 1905, as I've mentioned, through his activation by the new music of Debussy and Ravel, his immersion in the theosophy of Annie Besant, his study of astronomy and physics at the Sorbonne, and his quest for astral vision. That this facility proved exceptional is illustrated by Annie Besant's observation, mentioned earlier, that there are few people who have come to the point where they can look quietly on the astral world and record what they see there. In painting a Morphofugue in two colours and the astral paintings that followed, Kupka then conceived of a cosmic order that manifested itself rhythmically in structures that could be studied in the new sciences and observatories of astronomy, and discovered by an artist endowed with extrasensory receptivity, especially astral vision. Kupka's reconception of his role as an artist then entailed developing this knowledge through an intense exploration of art, science, physics, and astronomy, inspired by Besant's theosophy, alongside the discipline of yoga and transcendental meditation, which he so rigorously practiced throughout his life. Following what he called the influence exerted on artists by the new sciences, particularly astrophysics and astrophotography, alongside Annie Besant's theosophy, Kupka then explored the vital part played by electromagnetic fields in generating rhythms. Once immersed in this expanding constellation of discoveries, it was then Kupka explored how his Symmorphies could act, as in his words, living magnetic or electromagnetic fields, unquote. In absorbing the beholder of his art in their symphonic emissions with the force of magnetic hypnosis, Kupka then envisioned that his Symmorphies would be ultimately able to generate mesmeric vibrations of thought and emotion comparable to the music of the spheres, underscoring the rhythms of the planets in the solar system and life on Earth. Thank you. That's all from me.
Well, Faye, what a journey we've been on.
That was incredible.
The scholarship that you've undertaken to produce a presentation of this standard is just amazing. And I'm not the notion that one artist tried to contain almost all of the disciplines of his particular age in his painting, just unbelievable, and so on. So, and so clearly explained for people who perhaps haven't got the expertise to encompass those worlds. So, I mean, I think were we live, you would have a big round of applause. But Annalise's hand is up. I'm sure she wants. Yes.
Oh, no, I'm clapping. I'm clapping. Hey, can I ask you to stop the sharing so that you can see people's reactions to your presentation?
Yeah, stop sharing. Yeah.
Because, I mean, it was mind-blowing to me, but I don't know what other people thought.
Well, I actually found his work. I find his work, it is particularly the outer space work, I find it mind-blowing.
Yeah. Now, would anybody like to come in with comments or of how they found it, or their own astral visions, or and their own interface? It's an exciting presentation. Can I invite anybody who would like to come in on that area, either on the spirituality or on the art, or the interface between art and music and so on? Anybody going to start that off? There's Annalisa, all ready to start it off.
I have, my mind was just connecting all these dots. We've just come, Lila and I, we've just attended this conference where they are bringing, again, science and spirituality together, right? And now it's quantum physics, right? And we talked about psychedelics.
Exactly.
And we heard about Chris Bach.
Yeah.
Incredible experience with psychedelics that he's done over a period of 20 or 30 years, very scientifically. So experiencing what you might call the astral dimension. I mean, it was just like, oh my God, it's like 100 years later, we're there again, right?
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
like a cosmic, I don't know what to call it, alignment. But the thing that I kept thinking was, how is it that Kandinsky didn't make it into this presentation?
Yeah, can I just ask, because this is exactly my question. It's just continuing the question by Annalisa. Did he know Kandinsky or Mondrian? Was he in contact with them?
He knew of them, and he knew of their work. He wasn't in direct contact with them, and while his spiritual position aligns very much with both Kandinsky and Mondrian, you know, particularly his transcendental meditation, etc. I found that Kupka became far more scientific in his orientation in terms of astrophysics. You know, that's why he decided to enroll at the Sorbonne, you know, in sciences, you know, to really see how he could develop that dimension. How might you see his work correlating with Kandinsky's?
Yeah, Kandinsky was very interested in music as well, and
of course, the music.
So he was actually, he wrote about it, is concerning the spiritual in art, about the relationship between painting and music. So
yes, absolutely.
There, and Mondrian was very interested in mathematics and in
absolutely, mathematics.
Yes, and also in the underlying the invisible structures or metrics of the universe. But I think it was also very scientific in his approach, and so there are some similarities, I think, in the work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Yes, Jill, do come into this discussion. Jill.
We can't hear you.
Oh. I was going to say, I think it would be fascinating to do an exhibition. Of them all
and
together.
Ilma af Klint, of course.
Yes,
absolutely. And Vilma.
Because they were all influenced by theosophy. Jill, I think there's a problem with your
sound.
Yeah, you're not connected, perhaps. Your microphone and Zoom might not be synced.
Could you write it in the chat and I'll read it out?
Yeah.
We'll just wait for you to write it, but if anybody else wants to come in, do come in.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just talk until Jill.
I just saw her.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting that, you know, music has always been, in a sense, had this notion of the music of the spheres, but interestingly, it was inaudible, whereas the artists appear to be able to paint it. The musicians appear to be aware of its presence, but actually not be able to get at it. It's essentially inaudible, the music of the spheres. So I think it's a very interesting concept that that visually we can portray it, but somehow or other we can't get at it in sound. But
yes.
Can you write it in the chat, Jill? Is there anybody else who wants to come in on that? I mean, the notion of color and music has been long debated. The big problem is that when people ask people about their relations with music, that nobody makes the same relation of color to sound. So it's very difficult to get a definitive relation because people associate blue with one note or one thing, and red and so on. But I think the notion of looking at that the color sphere that Besant created, I thought fascinating, because I hadn't looked at that, because the entrance of the fugue pattern is a small fragment set out, and then the next voice answers a fifth or a fourth away.
Yes.
And the notion that you've got because we've got the cycle of fifths, you see, that we do in it, so that C has got no sharps and flats, and G has one, and then D has two, and so on. And in the end, it goes on a full circle and ends up with F having one flat and going back to C with no sharps and flats. So we do have a cycle similar to that, but not as complex, with not so many colors or notes and keys and that. So I think it's interesting to correlate the two cycles, the cycle of color and the cycle of notes. I think is a fascinating idea. Right, here is
Nick
in the chat. I was thinking that Kandinsky et al. Were very much in Munich, and maybe politics kept them apart. Is Jill's? I don't know whether Leela and Annalisa, you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I actually thought that they may have something in common. I mean, that maybe Faye knows more about politics, because Kandinsky was initially with the Blue Rider movement, and they had an anarchist type of agenda about, which was political, and they reminded, their manifesto reminded me of Kupka's kind of anarchic ideology, which was also very popular at the time. So I think they may have more in common than
Nick, go ahead. Yeah, ask the question.
Here's
Small group, so we can just jump.
Here is the question. I wanted to ask Faye whether she felt the force of the spheres when viewing those pictures. I think they're stunning. This is Jill. And we'll come to you next, Nick. And I think I was going to ask you, Faye, whether there was any research from the people who saw them, whether they did feel the energy that he thought was in them. So did he manage to communicate that? He attempted to express it, but did he manage to communicate that? Is there any indication of people looking at his work?
There is. I'm going to start with the contemporary. When I was with two of my colleagues at the Centre Pompidou about a month ago, looking at the artwork, we of Kupka, we were all, and two of them were artists. We were all blown away by them, because the Centre Pompidou is now the inheritor of all the artwork, and it's finally putting up a lot of his work that hadn't been shown before, and they were huge, and they were in terms of opticality, they were such a blast. So the three of us felt that they had incredible force. And what we discussed extensively was from 1920 onwards, his use of the elliptical lines, in terms of the elliptical rotation of planets. And was that energy communicated at the time? It was amongst particular artists. He was close to the Duchamp family. He became close to the Duchamp family, and the sculptor amongst them are really wrote about the power of his painting.
Excellent. Nick, would you like to come in now?
Thank you, yeah, and thank you for the presentation. I just noticed also, somebody mentioned it earlier, a strange synchronicity about this 100-year cycle. And there's a lot of interest in this kind of thing again, Theosophists bumping up. I just saw a book that just came out about the Young-Pauli conjecture and the role of image, and they're referencing the work of Hilma af Klint in that as well. I just wonder if you got any thoughts about why the resurgence now? Like, what's going on? Why is it zeitgeist?
Yes, I am very much aware of that, and I work closely with an artist who is a mesmerist and Jungian and various other engaged in various other fields. One of my professional doctorate students also is very engaged with Hilma, and she does a lot of work on auras. So I have noticed, particularly in the last decade, that there has been an incredible change in relation to that. I first noticed it when I was at a conference in Iceland, and this was in 2015, and a lot of Hilma's work was shown there. And that was one of the first times I'd seen a lot of it. And there was a lot of discussion on it.
I think it's interesting that I've just come from a conference on cathedral music, which seems a million miles away from where we are. But a lot of discussion of the decline of Christianity and the decline of religion and the searching, which is going on now. I mean, as Nietzsche said, that God is dead, but we shall miss him. And the searching, there was the same search 100 years ago, but Christianity still had quite a hold on quite a lot of Europe, Christianity of various kinds. But I mean, everywhere it's declining in a sense, the numbers, and that would give a real space for theosophy and its massive literature and influence that it had. That would very neatly fill that space. And certainly when people are tracing the origins of the so-called New Age, although nobody could call it new now, Swedenborg is a crucial player in the history of that. So he's emerging in any study of sort of contemporary spirituality as a figure, and of course is a figure in your accounts. So I think one has to see that the decline of the dominant faith of Europe leaves the space now for theosophy, and the rise of psychedelics. Again, it's interesting that you didn't say that Kupka used psychedelics. He used actually meditative techniques, didn't he? Not psychedelics to get these experiences. And that in a sense, there's a division in our current culture between those people who think the answer lies in psychedelics in some shape or form, and those people who are exploring different forms of reaching another way of knowing, like transcendental meditation and mindfulness and the yoga and all of that. So you have some of the tropes that are there.
Shamanism as well.
Sorry? Shamanism, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although my sense that theosophy is quite a way away from shamanism. It's in a funny way, it was born in a Christian Europe. I mean, the very word theo in it, and so on. And I think that the insertion of shamanism has come much more recently in it, and so on. I mean, it goes into the same field, but it does it rather differently. Although, of course, it does it, I mean, as I do on the drum, and the shamanic journey on the beating drum, but I don't see much of that around there, because things like ethnomusicology and anthropology were in their infancy then, really. So I don't know whether that does explain the rise. I don't know whether you think that's true, Nick, that there's a sort of hole where God was, and Theosophy, actually, because it has some of its roots in Christianity, fills the hole quite neatly, and re-exploring it. And as you said, Annalisa, you know, the whole astro, you know, the space travel and all of that is a different dimension from looking at it through a telescope and so on. So I don't know whether you want to add anything to that, Nick, do you?
Thank you. Yeah, it makes sense to me. The spiritual, you know, the man's search for, or people's search for meaning, or something like that. Also, I feel as if that time, 100 years ago, something from the future felt like it was pressing in, and you can even see it in those images of the stars and what they were finding out. You know, new information's pressing into the collective consciousness. And it could be that when that happens, there's the need for a different kind of vocabulary, form of expression to catch it when it first comes, because it's so hard. The numinous is so hard to put into words. It's just like art and music and different forms of something are the only way to sort of help shepherd the future into the, from that plane of existence down in, you know, to the material plane or something.
Yes, I find that his drawing on the whole tone scale, because whereas the major and minor scales had an anchor point, you know, you knew when you'd come home, the whole point of the whole tone scale, I'm not sure everybody knows it, da da dee da. No, I've got it wrong already. Da da da. It's the same gap between all the notes. Therefore, you have no sense of being home. So it's much more mysterious than the major and minor scales, where you had a sense of being home. And of course, Debussy was the one who made that scale so available and so ready. And of course, then the 12-note serialists picked it up, but in its chromatic form rather than in its whole note form. So we had the emergence of music that was uncertain, much more uncertain, much more mysterious than when we knew where we were in a key, and we knew when we'd come home. And in a sense, that was, it doesn't relate to it, but you had the Gregorian chant before that, which was much less fixed in its endings, and then we get the dominance of major and minor, and then we get the whole tone scale and the chromatic scale emerging, and so on. And the 12-note composers, using all the chromatic notes, said they didn't want, the whole point was not to have any home note. We were very mysterious because there was no sense of coming home, so you were continually in a world of uncertainty.
In flux.
Yeah, in flux, that's right, in flux.
Which is very Bergsonian.
Yes, that's right. And of course, Debussy, in general, did his best work in small pieces, because he's critiqued quite often for getting nowhere, for having a sense of eternal presence, rather than moving through or modulating and a sense of progression through the pieces. His pieces are actually quite still. You know, the notion of moving forward by developing themes and changing keys all disappears with Debussy.
Yes, yeah, that's really interesting. Yes. And I suppose in relation to this concept of uncertainty and flux, you know, Bergson, I always find Bergson the most apt philosopher of that time.
Mm.
In
Yes.
relation to, you know, a very different way of thinking.
And I think it's interesting because, you know, when you look at the concept of liminality, it is to do with mystery, it's to do with uncertainty. It's a sense of being okay in a place which is uncertain. which is different from everyday knowing, where paradox, you can coexist with it, and so on. So the notion of the whole of using those scales which are uncertain as a way of portraying uncertainty is very interesting, I think, really.
Oh, very, very interesting. You know, I hadn't thought of the note scales as having that uncertainty, but of course, yes, it's very clear. Yeah.
But then, of course, interestingly, he goes back and looks at Bach's fugues, which, but interestingly, by using the fugues and using the 24, well, the 48 preludes and fugues, of course, that was put together because he wanted to make all the keys available, and it established major and minor keys more clearly. So the combination of two huge changes in music history, one the whole tone scale, another the Bach 48 preludes and fugues, is interesting. He puts those two together.
Yes.
Fascinating.
But I think with Bach, he's fascinated by the endlessness of it, and I think he's correlating that with his cosmic vision.
But just to finish with, of course, our cycle of fifths is actually not in tune with the universe, because it doesn't happen in the cosmic world. The octave never closes, and so it's in many ways a circle which is constructed. And I don't know enough about color, you artists, to know whether the color circle does go round in a circle and closes itself, which the music, the cycle of fifths doesn't, in terms of the actual sounds and the way, because, you know, the octaves are there. It's all, that's what Bach was dealing with in the 48. The octaves don't close, but he wrote those pieces so that it was tuned, that you could get round it, because you can't in the laws of physics, but you can by just putting modifications to the tuning of the piano. And there were many tunings available in Bach's day, and he opted for the one which enabled you to go right round the cycle of fifths, which before that wasn't really possible. So that was the tuning, which is why he called his work the well-tempered clavier, or the well-tuned clavier, to make one tuning established, rather than the multiples of tuning that were being used at the time, which meant in some cases you could play well in C and G, which only had one sharp and so on. But the more sharps and flats you had, the more out of tune it was, and the more you couldn't use it. So you had to make a modification, which the piano tuners do, to the unnatural scale in order to make it go in a circle. Maybe your circle is purer than our circle.
That is extremely technical, June, but really, really interesting. I studied music, and I didn't know what the mathematical relationships that you're talking about. I had no idea. But I wanted to ask the group if you guys have any comment regarding this idea of the artist as the medium through which, you know, the cosmic order flows through. And I'm probably paraphrasing really badly what Faye talked about earlier, but I'm just trying to ask people what they think of the role of the artist in the, you know, now in the contemporary world, or in the ages, whether this is something that, because I'm also thinking about the role of the artist shaman. So I have it in my mind, and so I just wondered if, you know, if you guys had anything to say about that.
Nick, do you want to come in on that at all?
I actually think the role of the artist is to make visible what is invisible to others' eyes. You know, and I think that, I suppose, it covers a multitude of what Faye has been talking about as well, what all of you have been talking about. But it is that about the artist has been gifted in a way that they can make visible something that other people just can't see.
Yeah. And that's what Kupka was endeavoring to do.
Well, it's very interesting, because Dorothy Sayers, who's famous for Peter Wimsey and Gaudy Knight, was also a theologian. I've just been reading a collection of her essays, which has come out, called Whimsical Christianity, in which she says exactly what you've said. The great work of art makes the image of God clearer. And she, in trying to classify works of art as sacred or not, it's the person who can go through into the image of God and make it audible or visual and so on. So although she wouldn't be a theosophist, she was very much a quite orthodox high Anglican. She's in the same area, but using a different sort of frame to frame it. So it's fascinating that you did that. You put that in the area. I often feel that different philosophies say the same thing but using different words. Yeah.
And in many ways, musicians have a similar role. They are creating something, you know, the oral that other people can't hear.
That's
and
right.
They're actually able to create that as well. So, and if you like what Faye is talking about, that of the art and the artist and the music coming together, you know, it just makes so much sense.
It does. It does.
Yes.
I think maybe also it's like, yes, people sometimes can't hear it or can't see it, or it's that they kind of can. So that when the artist captures it, there's a resonance field, and a lot of people go, yeah, it's that. I've been feeling that or sensing it coming, but I haven't been able to articulate it or make a song about it or draw it, but I felt it coming, and I felt its presence, whatever it is.
Well, sometimes with some pieces, and one of the pieces I used to use a lot was Schubert's setting of the 23rd Psalm. And I used it starts very quietly. And I would say to the pianist, as you know, you start as if people are not sure whether they hear it or not. It's sort of coming out of a silence. And at the end, it goes back, but you're not sure whether you've been already, you can still hear it, even though it's going on, even though the sounds have stopped. But the notion that the music, I can remember sometimes when I've conducted a big piece, the music it's not a memory, it's still going on somehow or other in a mystical way, as if it doesn't stop. It's just that sometimes you can hear it more clearly. You know?
Yes. I mean, that's my experience as well.
We're at after the ending point, and I think the quality of the discussion, I think also, Faye, must hearten you with what you've actually
yes, very much so,
because it was exciting, scholarly, and very engaging. So we thank you warmly for, you know, such a wonderful presentation, and your images and the way you used the PowerPoint to illustrate it, going forward and back and taking us back and over. It was a model on how to do that. So thank you so much. Annalisa, do you want to say anything about
so much for that?
Did you want to say anything, Annalisa, about future meetings?
Yes, so, well, it's just a few people left now. We should probably move the announcements at the beginning of the event.
That's what I was trying to get you to do, but I failed lamentably.
No, I got suddenly, I was like, what does she want me to say? So there are a couple of good things that have been announced today, actually. You should have received an email from INSS. So they've removed, although I think we're all members today, maybe not Judith, but we're all, they've removed the, you know, the tickets for attending SIGs for non-members. Now it's just a donation. If you want to donate, fine. If you don't want to donate, it's not you can attend.
Rather than repeat that, Annalisa, where are we going with future meetings of this group?
Yeah, so we're gonna, you, me, and Lila needs to agree on a date for October.
Yeah.
And I think we're talking about the 17th, around the 17th of October, to have a conversation rather than a talk.
Yeah.
And the idea is to have these conversations once every 3 months as a regular thing
Yep.
for our SIG, so that members and non-members, people who attend our talks, are aware that every 3 months we can just convene and have just a free, generally, conversation around art and spirituality. But we need to continue inviting people, I think, to talk, because I think Faye's presentation was incredibly
Just incredible.
rich, and the way that you approached Kupka's art, I didn't even know the artist bad, but the complexity of your critical approach is, I mean, it made his abstract art alive to me, because I had no idea that there were so many influences on his work. And I think this approach is necessary for Kandinsky, for Imre Klint, for
Yes, I agree.
a lot of abstract artists, particularly of that period, that we are completely missing.
Yeah.
Because curators and museums keep going on and on and on about form.
Absolutely.
That's all they talk about.
Absolutely.
The form. And even today, the National Galleries, that is hosting apparently a spectacular exhibition of Van Gogh, and I booked today the tickets for a month, is fully booked. So I'm going in October. And what did they publish on LinkedIn? A scientist talking about the color yellow as a chemical, a new chemical compound that was available to artists. And she went on, she's a scientist, and she went on and on about chrome yellow, which is great, absolutely fascinating. However, let's not reduce Van Gogh to his material, please.
Yes,
I just want to
absolutely.
say one second as well.
The same things happened in music, because Schoenberg and the serial composers, they were very much philosophers and into philosophy and spirituality, and yet everybody spends the time analyzing how many times the tone road comes that way and this way and the other way, and there's no as you say, all the arts have gone down the route of looking at their construction and forgotten the values, the expressive character of it. And even the university courses, that's what they do.
Well, they certainly don't in mine.
Sorry, Faye.
They certainly don't in my university courses.
I am sure, because I shared your work, Faye, with my students in the past, and about Kupka, and it was just a wonderful opportunity for me to do that, because it's not happening very often. I can do it, but today, for example, it was so good to hear you, and also what I felt was very unique is just that it's a reminder of artists working together with spiritual philosophers,
and scientists,
having conversation, not only with scientists, but also with people with ideas on spirituality and the cosmos. And this is something I think, Annalisa, which is also missing. Because it's not part of the discussion of form. It's separate discussion. So I think this is again the gap that we are trying here to bridge.
That's what we're trying to do.
Which you do very well.
And I think the success of a great artist is finding the right form for the ideas that they're trying to convey. So when they are successful when the material that they choose is consistent with the ideas that they want to convey. That's when there's the perfect marriage. It's not just about the material, though. It's not just about the technique. It's not just about, where the stone came from. And,
I think it's also that, and the whole dilemma of having an idea, a big idea in your head, but that to make the materials work, the practical world work, that's a huge struggle. And what you portrayed so beautifully was how over his life, he was always struggling with how do you make it manifest? because the idea is often vast. I mean, as a musician, I can speak, you know, it's vast, and you want to compose an opera, but all you've got is a piano and a voice. So how do you, you know,
Yes.
how do you make that creative idea fit the limited materials that are available to you at any given time? You know?
It has to be economical in the means. Right?
That's
Yeah.
right. But I think the question that you ask, Annalisa, which could be the question for our next you know,
Yeah, I would
discussion,
love this.
is how
Yeah.
far is the role of the artist of whatever kind a role of revealing the invisible world, or however you want to call it, or the world beyond, or the liminal world,
Yes, the liminal
and
world.
so on.
Yes.
The liminal world. How far is that the role of the artist? Because that is so seldom discussed, and yet actual artists are wrestling with that all the time.
All the time.
And because we're human beings and we want meaning and purpose, we want to be clear what our purpose is. And our purpose isn't actually to create a canvas with colors on it. It's much, much bigger than that.
Yes.
You know, that's, you know, purpose isn't that. My purpose isn't just to write a song. It's to reveal something, or of me and of the world and the planets through what I'm doing. But that is so seldom discussed.
Yeah, the canvas with the paint on it and the song are only the end product.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
You know,
And then
they're
you
the
start
end
to
product of a very deep spirituality that is being expressed.
absolutely.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that I love, which you would love, that Dorothy Sayers had a wonderful description of the Trinity, the traditional God, the Creator, God, the Redeemer, God. That she said, if you want to understand that, then there's the creative idea. It's what I was sort of saying, and then there's the creative idea and how you get it into some sort of manifest form.
Yes.
And then there's the spirit, which needs continually to keep flowing between the creative idea you had and the form that it takes. And I think her book, The Mind of the Maker from 1933, is a marvelous description of the dilemma of the creator.
Yeah.
You're always having to, something that's bigger in your head than can be portrayed with what you can either afford, or, you know, the colors, the palette that's available, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, brilliant. I think we ought to end, and I'm just sorry that Ken has appeared when we have apparently finished.
Yeah, sorry, Ken.
So I'm really sorry, Ken, but I do suggest that you watch a most beautiful presentation and so on. And I can't say we're grateful. There's no way of putting our thanks to you in words, Faye. I mean, but I won't sing. I'll resist that. So,
Oh, I would like to hear the singing.
but it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful to hear it again, because I've heard it once before, but I did see the modifications, the extra scholarship.
And elaborations.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
So I think we ought to close this meeting with a big round of applause again for Faye and your scholarship, and do keep going with that wonderful scholarship.
I certainly will, and thank you for your inspirational audience.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.